use your congressional offices. Who has Douglas County now? Ken Buck? Great.
Jason Crow, unfortunately.
Is he a buddy of yours too?
I was on the House floor that day.
And we have a question about that as well.
I saw him. I have a video. I have a 12-minute video. I know exactly what he was doing. And it ain't what he said he was doing.
Well, CJ Garbo, who I think you know.
I do know CJ.
CJ has asked, with all the doubt, anger, confusion, conspiracy theories, and inconsistencies reported in the media, what are your thoughts as someone who was there on the January insurrection event? What was it about, and who do you think perpetrated it?
And insurrection's in air quotes.
Insurrection?
Contact.
Okay. So here's the really awful thing about January 6th. And this is a difficult conversation that people, some of my colleagues have refrained from having with their constituents, and some have been very honest, and some have ducked away from it. I'm just going to give you Kat's opinion. Leading up to January 6th, I had stated that I was going to object to the certification of Arizona and Pennsylvania. I was going to do that because after reviewing all of the documents, all the judiciary documents, all the briefings that I had attended, I saw firsthand that Arizona and Pennsylvania had both violated Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the United States Constitution, which states that states must determine and have the power to determine the time and manner in which elections are conducted. In the case of Arizona, there was a court ruling that never saw the light of day with the state legislature and arbitrarily circumvented their rules to change the laws in Arizona under the guise of COVID. In Pennsylvania, you had local election officials and you had the state Supreme Court making rulings that fundamentally changed election law leading up into the election. Now, regardless of where you are at on this, the fact remains that you have to have a House member and you have to have a senator to object to that state. There were only 2 states that had a senator and a House member that were willing to object. That then would have triggered the mandatory 2 hours of debate in both the House and the Senate. Regardless, the House is a majority-run institution. We never had the votes, and we knew that going in. We knew that even by objecting, it wasn't going to change the outcome. It was about the principle of the matter. It was about taking a stand against election integrity, or taking a stand for election integrity in the face of these officials that had circumvented and undermined the United States Constitution. There was a lot of talk about we were going to turn the tide on the election. We were going to be able to flip it. No. We didn't have the votes. Even if we had enough states that were objected to, it wouldn't have mattered because you still needed the votes. Republicans are 5 short. At that time, we were 7 because we had the death of Luke Letlow, and that triggered a special, and we were short Claudia Tenney, who hadn't been seated. She was in the middle of a brutal recount in New York. It wouldn't have changed the outcome. And I know that is hard for some people to hear because I have had these very difficult conversations with people back home, and it is heartbreaking because they've been told, well, if more people would have stood up, we would. No. Keep in mind, I rallied for the president. I was at Trump rallies all across the state of Florida. I was in Georgia for the Senate races on a bus with Ted Cruz. We worked our tails off. I spent Christmas Eve on a bus with Ted Cruz trying to help with the Georgia election. I mean, we were doing everything that we could, but we just didn't have the votes. So that's the dynamics going in. Going in that day, we knew that there was a lot of angst going on because there were some Republicans that said, I don't like this, but I'm not going to object because I don't see it as a constitutional issue. And then you had some, like 130, 140 of us that said, we're going to object because we see a clear violation of the Constitution, specifically Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2. And then you had a third group of Republicans that said, we need to be graceful. We need to just call it what it is, vote to certify, let's move on, let's live to fight another day. So you had these three groups, and there wasn't any screaming going on. There wasn't any, I was having conversations with colleagues that were like, yeah, I'm going to vote to certify. I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, but you know what? All right, do your thing. Because we all knew, there was an understanding. It didn't matter. It wasn't going to change the outcome no matter what we did. So 2 o'clock, the process starts. We didn't know what was going on outside. My husband, Jessica, they were up in my office, which is in Longworth, same floor as Lauren, 6th floor Longworth building. And I was getting text messages. I started getting text messages. I'm sitting in the back row of the House chamber on the House floor. I wasn't up in the galley. I was up in the House floor in the very, very back row. And I'm sitting with Byron Donalds, who is another Florida freshman. You've probably seen him on Fox News a lot. He's a young black guy, Republican. He and I are vying for most conservative in Florida. So we're sitting next to each other, and my phone won't stop going off, and it's Capitol Police. And the text messages go something like this: there has been a perimeter breach. Shelter in place. 1 minute later, there's been a perimeter breach. Shelter in place. Lock your doors. There's been a perimeter breach. Shelter in place. Lock your doors. Move furniture. Barricade. Blah 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 blah. And I'm like, whoa. So I text Jessica and my husband. I said, what is going on? They send me a screenshot back of what's on the television, and it looked like ants crawling on the Capitol. And I said, holy smokes, that's going on? Inside the chamber, it was calm. Nobody knew what was going on. None of us had any idea. Nobody told us anything. I think I was the only one really, it was me and maybe a few other members who'd been there longer that had the text messages coming in from Capitol Police, because most people hadn't even been there long enough. We were 3 days on the job. They hadn't even signed up for the Capitol alerts yet. So they're getting messages from their team like, hey, something's going on. It wasn't until I saw the fire alarms, and it was a silent alarm, go off, and I'm seeing the strobes in the speaker's lobby. And I'm seeing Capitol Police running through the speaker's lobby. And a nice gentleman gets up on the microphone. He says, I'm just going to call him Lieutenant Dan because I don't know his name. He's Lieutenant something. And he said, hi, this is Lieutenant Dan. There has been a breach of the Capitol. Everything is fine. We're going to recess briefly, and please just stay here, and we'll reconvene in a few minutes. Now, what we didn't know was that the Senate had been breached already. So looking back, I'm thinking the Senate is a hop, skip, jump away. You can sprint in under 30 seconds from the Senate side to the House side. So they're telling members on the House side, you're fine, just hang out here for a hot minute. Everything's okay, we're handling it. We had no idea what was going on. About 5 minutes goes by. We resume the debate. We're talking about Arizona. And I'm sitting there, and I start hearing a faint chanting behind me. And I look behind me, and they're saying, get Nancy, hang Mike Pence. That's what they're chanting. And it's getting closer. And I elbow Byron. I'm like, something's about to go down. Are you ready? And he's like, oh, I'm ready. I'm like, okay, well, something's about to go down. I don't know what's happening, but something's not right. And I'm getting all these text messages, shelter in place. Then the one that got me, it said, get on the floor. And I'm like, get on the floor? Lieutenant Dan comes back up on the microphone. They pull Nancy Pelosi off the dais. They rush her out. And Lieutenant Dan says, ladies and gentlemen, the Capitol has been breached. Please reach under your seats. There is an evacuation hood. You need to turn it on, put it over your head, and get down. The backs of your chairs are bulletproof. We're about to gas the chamber. Now, I think in that moment, I was thinking, my husband, who's a first responder, you had to have been so scared. For me, not for you. You're a badass. But helplessness. Yeah, I'm thinking of Matt. I'm like, he's got to feel so helpless. And I think there is something biological within us. It's the fight or flight, right? And I reach down, and everyone's starting to rumble. The whole chamber's starting to rumble, and people are reaching out and pulling these little silver NASA bags out and trying to rip them open. And it's a battery pack like this with a giant goofy hood on it. And I look up at the media, and you want to talk about sheep. I look up at the gallery, or the press gallery, and they all have these ridiculous hoods on, and they're not equally pressurized, so they all go this way. So, and they make this terrible buzzing noise. So it's like you look up in the press gallery, and they're like, ee, like staring down with all their cameras, taking pictures of what's going on. And I'm like, and I felt like I had an out-of-body experience. I'm thinking, they're attacking our freaking Capitol. You gotta be kidding me. No. Poor little staffer runs by and runs up to Byron and says, "Sir, will you please put a mask on? Will you please put a mask on?" And Byron's like, "We're under attack, and you want me to put a mask on?" A COVID mask, not the hood, the COVID mask.
Oh, geez.
And Byron is all like, "Go on, get out of here." And I was like, he's just upset, but no, we're not putting on a freaking mask. And so Byron and I are standing there, and I'm like, we're gonna fight. Like, this ain't happening. Like, we're gonna fight. So I'm getting all pumped up, ready to fight. And I'm like swinging my thing around because I'm like, this could be a weapon. It's got a huge battery on it. And so I'm like, we're testing it out. And that's when I heard the glass break. I'm in the back row. I turn, and there's 12 doors that lead to the House chamber floor. And you hear this terrible pounding going on the doors. And Capitol Police are literally grabbing furniture, historic furniture, piling it up against the doors. The glass is breaking. I see hands reaching through in this door that's closest to me. And that's when 3 Capitol Police officers run over. They pull their guns. I got to give it up to my Texas guys. It's funny now. It wasn't funny then. But Texas, there was Ronnie Jackson, Troy Nels, who's a former sheriff. They're both new. Ronnie Jackson he's an admiral in the Navy. He was the president's physician for Obama and Bush and for Trump. And I'll tell you Ronnie Jackson's story later. But he's there. And then I see Pat Fallon, who's also a Texas member, and he's crazier than a sprayed roach. And but he's great. I love Pat, and he would laugh if he heard that. He grabs a hand sanitizer station that's on a wooden dowel, and he goes, boom, and he starts... And I'm like, what is going on? So the protesters are pushing. They're trying to reach in. They're trying to grab at the Capitol Police. They're trying to grab at Ronnie. They're grabbing at them. And Troy Nels, Texas sheriff, he's like, shoot him! And I'm like, oh, wow, this is about to go down. And so I had this moment of, I don't know if I'm going to make it out of here. So I want my husband to know what happened. Because they had turned off the C-SPAN cameras. They had texted me and said, we can hear, but the C-SPAN camera feed had gone down. And so I said, I want people to know what happened. So I turned my phone on, I put it in my pocket, and I just leave it recording. And you see in that video, when I played it back, there were a lot of people on the floor crying, just fetal position crying, scared. Some people in Colorado were doing that. From Colorado. We're doing that. You really saw the person's character. It wasn't Republicans versus Democrats in that moment. Everybody was just members, and there were a lot of people that were scared, and there were a lot of people who were ready to take a stand and fight. And you had Republicans helping Democrats and vice versa. This was not a blame game. There was no finger pointing happening on the House floor. It was, we're about to fight. They're about to gas this chamber, and we have a lot of people that we need to get out of here. And so the Texas guys are helping the Capitol Police keep that door secure. There were a couple of Capitol Police fighting back people in the speaker's lobby so that we could run out and then run down into the tunnels of the Capitol. And it was awful. It was horrific. I've watched that video probably 20 times. Where I'm hearing people crying. I'm hearing members praying. I'm hearing people on the phones with their kids saying their goodbyes. It's awful. It was awful. And the fact that this has turned into a situation where half the country feels like one party was responsible for this. And they think there's even been, I've had people message me and say, you were in on this. You created this. You did this. I'm like, you're insane. Like, this is insane. No one, I don't care how far on each spectrum you are, no one wanted that to happen. Not a single person that I know, Republican or Democrat, has not condemned the violence that took place that day. It was awful. It showed how truly vulnerable we are in the United States Capitol. And in the hours that came after, we were hiding in the Ways and Means Committee room. That's where they put us, because they didn't have a plan. There had never been a plan drawn up for what happens if there's an attack on the Capitol. So it was pretty awful. It was pretty evident. And we're sitting there, and all of a sudden, that moment of unity when we were all holding on to each other, running through the tunnels to get to the Longworth House office building, that was gone. Because immediately in that room, where it was supposed to be a secure room because there were still people in the Capitol, still fighting Capitol police officers, they were doing interviews. They were doing live interviews saying, I'm in the Ways and Means room, and the Republicans are responsible for this, and ba 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 ba. It was unbelievable. I watched AOC stroll around casually in sneakers and a trench coat with glasses and her hair tied back in a low ponytail, because I remember exactly what she was wearing. She was wearing black leggings and black sneakers that had white bottoms. I'll never forget this image, because she was so quick to say that she was being threatened, that the protesters were at her door. That's chicken. It is. There were so many lies told about what happened that day, and the truth is that not a single person in there knew what was coming. Not a single person wanted that to happen. It was an awful, awful, terrible day. It was horrible. I still have nightmares about it. But the fact remains that the people who did that, they're not patriots. They're not patriots. I will have that conversation any day of the week. The people who were doing what they were doing, fighting Capitol police officers, punching them. I saw a video of a Capitol police officer take a fire extinguisher to the head. That is not patriotism. That is a group of people who have some very deep-seated hate issues, and that is not what this country is about. So I have been in several of the classified briefings on Homeland talking about this issue. There have been 15 briefings with FBI and Homeland Security. What I can share with you is that this is far from being over. There was intelligence that showed that this was planned. This was not a spur of the moment, hey, there's a bunch of people in Washington, D.C. having a good time, and then they got caught up in it. I do think there were people who were in the vicinity that maybe did get caught up in it, but no, by and large, you don't show up to Washington, D.C. with flex cuffs and gas masks and ballistic vests unless you have a plan going in. And so it's been pretty horrible. It has highlighted the gross intel and Homeland Security gaps that we have, and we're going to fix it so it never happens again, because it's the people's house. And now we see that we are Fort Pelosi with razor wire and walls around the United States Capitol, and that won't stand. I'm sorry, that was a really long answer. Sorry, CJ, that was a really long answer.